I never imagined that my ordinary job in a corporate office would place me in the middle of a story that would stay with me forever. Most of my days were the same: long hours behind a desk, endless emails, and deadlines that seemed to blur into each other. My boss was the kind of man who demanded precision, a person who lived by rules and discipline. He carried himself with authority, respected by everyone, but feared at the same time. To me, he was distant, someone whose approval I worked for but never truly received. I had accepted this monotony as part of my life, but everything shifted the day his wife began appearing at the office more often. She wasn't the type to seek attention, yet her presence could never go unnoticed. There was a calm grace about her, a quiet dignity that made people lower their voices whenever she entered the room. I often caught sight of her waiting for him, dressed elegantly, her eyes betraying a sadness that she masked behind polite smiles. At first, I thought it was my imagination, that maybe I was reading too much into small gestures, but as time went on, I recognized that her silence held more weight than words ever could. I had only exchanged a few casual greetings with her. They were brief, almost forgettable, yet there was something unspoken each time. A fleeting look, a polite nod, and then she would disappear into the boss's office, leaving me to wonder why her expression seemed so far away from the life she appeared to live. It wasn't curiosity in a reckless sense, but more of a quiet observation. I knew loneliness when I saw it, because in my own way, I was living it too. Weeks passed, and nothing changed until one particular office gathering. It was one of those formal events where employees pretended to be relaxed while keeping an eye on the boss's reactions. He stood at the center, surrounded by colleagues, his attention fixed on business even in social moments. She was by his side, smiling faintly, but her eyes wandered around the room as though searching for something that wasn't there. Our eyes met briefly, and in that instant, it felt as if she recognized the same restlessness in me that I saw in her. As the evening went on, I found myself moving past her in the crowd. It was then, so discreetly that no one else could notice, that she slipped a small folded piece of paper into my hand. My breath caught in my throat as I held it, uncertain of what it could possibly be. When I finally opened it later, the words were simple yet powerful. "Mind if I join your escape?" For a moment, I sat frozen, reading those words over and over again. It wasn't a love note, at least not in the obvious sense. It felt more like a cry for something real, something outside the walls of appearances and expectations. I didn't know what she meant exactly, but it struck a chord deep inside me. My life had been nothing but routine, and here was a message that hinted at breaking free from it. The note unsettled me, not because of danger, but because of possibility. My boss's wife had reached out in the most unlikely way, and I couldn't stop thinking about why she chose me of all people. I tucked the paper safely away, my heart racing, knowing that whatever this meant, it was only the beginning of something I couldn't yet define. The note stayed in my pocket for days, folded so many times that the edges began to tear. I couldn't ignore it, yet I couldn't rush to give it meaning either. Every time I looked at her, I wondered if she regretted slipping it to me, or if she had been waiting for me to understand. What struck me most was how naturally our paths started crossing after that evening, as if fate had given her the courage to step out of silence. She didn't say much at first, only brief acknowledgments that left me piecing together what she truly wanted to express. One afternoon, while the office buzzed with activity, she stopped near my desk with a calmness that disguised how unusual the moment was. She mentioned something casual, but there was a softness in her voice that told me she wanted more than small talk. Later, when we found ourselves walking toward the elevator, she spoke in a tone so low I could barely hear her. She said she often felt invisible in her own home, not because she lacked comfort, but because comfort had replaced connection. Her husband lived in a world of meetings and schedules, and though she stood beside him, she felt like a shadow in his life. I listened, unsure of how much I was allowed to say. It wasn't my place to question her marriage, yet her words carried a truth that resonated with my own quiet frustrations. I confessed that I too felt suffocated, not by a relationship, but by the monotony of work, the endless cycle of tasks that left no space for meaning. She looked at me then, and in her eyes was something startling: recognition. She understood without judgment, and for the first time, I felt seen. From that day on, our conversations became more deliberate. Sometimes it was in the hallway, other times in the corner of the lobby, or even a coffee shop just a short walk away where no one would think to look. We never discussed anything reckless, but each conversation chipped away at the walls we had built around ourselves. She told me about the books she once loved but no longer had time to read, about the places she wanted to visit but never did because schedules always came first. I told her about my balcony garden, about the music that filled the silence of my small apartment, about how I dreamed of escape not as running away, but as finding a space where I could breathe freely. She began to smile more during those moments, though the sadness never fully left her. She said her note had been written on impulse, a silent plea for someone to notice her need for air. Escape, she explained one evening, isn't about leaving everything behind. It's about finding something simple that makes you feel alive again. Her words lingered in me long after she walked away. I realized that our bond wasn't born out of forbidden desire, but out of an unspoken understanding that life had cornered us in different ways. She wasn't asking for promises, and I wasn't seeking illusions. What tied us together was a longing for authenticity, for laughter that wasn't rehearsed, for companionship that didn't come with conditions. And though I knew it was dangerous to let it grow, I couldn't deny that something real was quietly taking root between us. One evening after another long day, I noticed something different in her expression. There was a restlessness she no longer tried to hide, as if the weight of her silence had grown too heavy. She moved past me quietly, yet slipped another folded note into my hand with the same calm certainty as before. I opened it later, and this time the words were sharper, more urgent. I need to breathe. Will you let me join your escape? Reading it, I felt my chest tighten. There was no mistaking what she meant now. She wasn't asking for a reckless adventure, but for a place to exist without masks. I battled with myself, reminding my conscience of who she was, reminding my reason of the risks. Yet beneath all that hesitation was the undeniable truth. I wanted to give her what she asked for, because I knew exactly what it felt like to crave air when life had become suffocating. I folded the note slowly, and when I saw her again, I spoke quietly, almost afraid of my own words. Come to my place, I said. It's nothing grand, but you'll find peace there. She looked at me for a long moment before nodding, and in that nod was relief, almost gratitude. When she stepped into my small apartment later, there was no awkwardness. Instead, there was curiosity in her eyes as she noticed the details that shaped my world: a balcony garden filled with plants I tended to after work, shelves of books worn with use, a simple record player humming softly in the corner. It was the opposite of the grand home she lived in, yet she touched each thing with the tenderness of someone rediscovering something lost. We sat for hours, not as accomplices in something forbidden, but as two souls stripped of pretense. She laughed at the way I tried to keep herbs alive in little clay pots, and I listened as she told stories of her childhood, of carefree days that seemed so far removed from her present life. The sound of her laughter filled the room in a way that felt sacred, like a song she had forgotten she could sing. For the first time since knowing her, she wasn't guarded. She was simply herself, and that honesty was more intimate than any gesture could ever be. As the night deepened, she spoke of regrets, of how easy it was to get trapped in a life built on appearances and expectations. I shared my own fears, that I might spend years living only for deadlines, never touching the freedom I longed for. In her eyes, I saw not pity but understanding, and that understanding wrapped around me like a quiet promise. There was no need for dramatic declarations. The connection itself was enough. We didn't cross the line of what couldn't be undone. Instead, we built something quieter yet stronger, a sanctuary of words, of shared silences, of trust. She told me she hadn't felt this kind of peace in years, and I realized I hadn't either. In that small, unremarkable apartment, surrounded by the simplest of things, we found what we had both been missing. It wasn't possession, it wasn't escape in the reckless sense. It was simply the relief of being seen, truly seen. That night marked a turning point. I knew we couldn't go back to being strangers, and yet we couldn't step fully forward either. But as she smiled faintly before leaving, I understood that sometimes love isn't measured by permanence. Sometimes it's found in the rare spaces where two people can breathe freely, even if only for a while. The days after that evening carried a different weight. Our connection had deepened, yet neither of us pretended that it could erase the realities surrounding us. She belonged to a world of commitments, and I had no desire to tear apart what she had built. What we shared wasn't about breaking promises, but about finding a moment of honesty in a life full of obligations. Still, I knew that every word, every smile, every pause between us carried meaning we could not ignore. One night, as we sat quietly, she spoke with a steadiness that came from acceptance. She said she could never leave her husband. It wasn't simply about love or a lack of it. It was about history, family, responsibility, and a bond that, despite its emptiness, still mattered in its own way. She admitted that she had walked into this chapter with me not to replace him, but to remember herself. For a long moment, I said nothing, because what she confessed wasn't a betrayal. It was a truth I had already sensed. I told her I understood, and I meant it. I couldn't ask her to undo a life tied to someone else. What we had wasn't about future plans or promises written in stone. It was about a memory, a space we created where we were free to be who we were without judgment. She smiled softly, though her eyes glistened, and thanked me for giving her something she thought she had lost, the ability to feel alive, even for a short time. We agreed not to push it further, not to turn our bond into something destructive. Instead, we promised to carry it like a hidden treasure, something that didn't need to be displayed or defended, but something that would remain with us, quietly shaping how we looked at life. There was no dramatic goodbye, no broken vows. Just an understanding that we had reached the edge of what we could allow, and that was enough. When she left that evening, she touched my hand briefly, a gesture that carried more weight than 1,000 words. I watched her go, not with bitterness, but with a strange sense of peace. It struck me then that some love stories are not meant to last a lifetime. Some arrive only to remind us of the parts of ourselves we had let slip away. They are not failures. They are lessons written in the language of the heart. In the days that followed, I found myself looking at life differently. The routine at the office hadn't changed. My boss remained the same, and yet I carried something inside me that no one could see. I carried the memory of being understood, of sharing a connection that went beyond appearances. It wasn't possession, it wasn't forever, but it was real. I often think of her words, how she wanted to join my escape. In the end, she did, not by leaving everything behind, but by stepping into a moment of truth where she could breathe again. And I, too, escaped the prison of monotony, even if just for a while, because of her. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is not permanence, but presence. She reminded me that my heart was still beating, that I was still capable of feeling something profound. And though we parted with respect and silence, the chapter we shared will remain with me, not as regret, but as proof that even the briefest encounters can carry the deepest meaning.